evening. Welcome to our Energion Hangout for this evening. And tonight I'm talking with Robert Martin. He's the author of the book, The Caregivers Beatitudes. And before I ask him about the book, I want to ask him about his tagline. It says he's the abnormal Anabaptist. Now, I've known not a few Anabaptists, considering I'm descended from Anabaptists. And some of them weren't all that normal, but a lot of them were. So what's an abnormal Anabaptist?
That's a good question. I came up with that tagline 3-4 years back when I was trying to figure out a new name for my blog, trying to figure out how to characterize what I'm writing about. The general idea is that Anabaptism to start with is an abnormal thing. It's not Catholic, so you're not talking about your standard mainstream Catholic. It also tends to not be Protestant. We like to talk about Anabaptism as being the third way of modern Christianity, a different radical path, in that we're going to basically buck the goad of what culture does, of what church does, to try to really get to what it means to be a follower of Jesus, a follower of Christ. It's that in and of itself is an abnormal thing. So it's a twist on that. But also, if you think of Anabaptism as only being one particular denomination, like most people will recognize an Anabaptist church as being a Mennonite church. They think Anabaptist, Mennonite. You look at any Mennonite church, and I would say that there's a lot that's in a Mennonite church that is not exactly Anabaptist, or may have taken Anabaptism and taken it to a different direction than what it was. And so I want people to understand that if you look at a Mennonite church and think that's Anabaptism, I'm not that. I may be a Mennonite. I go to a Mennonite church. I've been a member of a Mennonite church since I was very young. But I am abnormal if that's your standard of what it means to be an Anabaptist. I'm not what you normally see as an Anabaptist. I like to think of myself as abnormal, even from what you see as your standard Anabaptist in Christian culture today.
So maybe a radical.
You could say that, yes. I don't think of myself necessarily as a radical. I mean, most people think the picture of a radical is someone who's got a protest sign every day and standing on a street corner, hair a mess, and wearing sackcloth and ashes, or somehow stirring up trouble in some obscure way or something like that. I don't think of myself necessarily as that, but I'm radical, again, looking at a root form of the word, getting to the root of things. What does it really mean? What is the basics, the fundamentals of what it means to be a Christian? So Anabaptism started out as a radical movement, and I want to try to continue that in a radical way, getting to that root of what it means to be a true Christian.
Okay, well, while we're discussing this, so you have that also, that Menno nerds over there. Tell us about that, just as we get acquainted with what you do.
Oh, that started out as a hashtag about 3 years ago on Twitter. A friend of mine, his name is Chris, he put up on Twitter something about being really excited about something very uniquely Mennonite, and just tagged it hashtag MennoNerd. And I picked up on that and started throwing the hashtag around myself whenever I came up with something very particularly Mennonite or Anabaptist. A couple of other guys grabbed on, but it turns out we all have blogs of some sort or whatever we're writing. And so we just started sharing each other's information, creating this network of communications using Twitter, Facebook, blogs, all sorts of stuff. And it grew from that. It's this organic thing that we started, as I said, 3 years ago with a Twitter hashtag, that now we have about 56 individual blogs in the network that we syndicate on our website, mennonerds.com, as well as we conduct our own hangouts where we have discussions and conversations. We have a MennoNerds Facebook group where there's all sorts of strange conversations going on. We've spawned our own little character. The little MennoNerds picture that I have down there has a picture of a little bird with glasses on it. Her name is Rebstock. She's our little mascot. And if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll hear Rebs.talk. We just started a vlog like 3 days ago. I mean, it's growing like that. And the idea behind it is to utilize social media, utilize blogs, utilize this technology that is available to us to build a network of Anabaptist-minded people globally. We have members in Australia, Philippines, South Africa, Sweden, England, all over the United States, all over Canada, and we're working on trying to get some people to come in from the Asian main continent and South America to try to just fill out more of the international flavor on it. And again, it's all about what does it really mean to be an Anabaptist in the modern world today, and all sorts of conversations we're having about that. How does Anabaptism relate to current events in the United States, like racial tensions in our country? How does Anabaptism relate to way our country handles foreign policy or domestic policy? Or what does Anabaptism mean when it comes to how you read the Bible? Or what parts of the Bible do you think are more important than others? And these are the kinds of conversations we're having, and I think you'll find that there's a very broad spectrum of people in this group. Everything from some fairly conservative folks to some pretty progressive folks on the other end of the spectrum. And we don't always agree on everything, but we do agree that we're on the same team of trying to figure out what it means to follow Jesus in this modern world.
Well, as you probably recognize from my last name of Neufeld, that's a very good Mennonite name.
Yes, it is.
You'll find if you put my name into Google, you'll find a number of references to me and a lot more to a bunch of Mennonites. And I am a Mennonite descent. So it's kind of interesting to me watching that going on, and this will tie in because in your book, you head toward the Beatitudes for a subject that others might not have thought of, that, and speak about going to the Sermon on the Mount. I recall having somebody stop by my house a few years ago, and he was trying to explain to me that the Sermon on the Mount actually didn't apply to modern Christians. It was really a Jewish or transitional text, that Jesus was only talking to Jews. So it was kind of an interesting line there. And you say that that's the key, I guess kind of the Anabaptist ethic and living would be the key, is Sermon on the Mount.
It's that and it's parallel passages in the book of Luke. And I mean, generally speaking, you look at a lot of Jesus' teaching, and the Sermon on the Mount kind of puts everything that Jesus talks about into 3 chapters in the book of Matthew, chapters 5, 6, and 7. And then it seems like everything else that he's talking about in the other 3 Gospels and the rest of Matthew all can link back to what do you do when you have an enemy? What does it mean to truly be righteous? What does it mean to do things for the world around you? What does it mean to look out for yourself and for your own needs and such, if those things are possible? I'm sitting here right now in the lobby of a church that I go to every Tuesday night for a program called Celebrate Recovery. And it also bases its ideals on the Beatitudes of these are principles and ideas of what it means to recover in your life from something, whether it's an addiction, whether it is a hang-up, whether it is some pain from the past. And the general principles of the Beatitudes apply very much to today's day and age. That I would say that if you were to indicate a particular text of scripture that is key to what it means to be Anabaptist, go to Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and just take that Sermon on the Mount and pull it apart and examine it and go into as much depth as you can on it, and you'll really find a lot of the Anabaptist ideals right in that particular passage.
And in a sense, then, we as Christians, if we take that seriously, being followers of Jesus, we'd have to say that we're all, in a sense, in recovery.
Yeah. Yes,
that would be something. Now, just let me to remind everybody, we do always turn on the Q&A app for these things, and I do have an audience question for you. I don't know if you have your column up, but I'll go ahead and read it in here for you. Since since Jesus was considered radical, as he also taught his disciples to get to the root of what it means to have a relationship with the Father, what would you say is your ongoing struggle to let go of your way in order to come closer to Jesus' way? And before you answer that, I will tell people we will talk about Robert Martin's book, but it's at some point in here, but it's also very important to talk about who he is and where the book came from. So
Yeah.
what do you think?
Ongoing struggle to let go of my way in order to come closer to Jesus' way. Oh boy. That's a good question. That really is. And I think really that comes to one of the main roots of anything that you're dealing with when it comes to trying to follow Jesus. I don't think there's a Christian out there who doesn't think that the Bible is something important to read and something that we go to for our theology, for our ideas, for our ethics, and things like that. I think probably for myself, as well as I could probably speak in general for a lot of Mennonites and Anabaptists, the biggest thing to let go of is the feeling that you have the right answer as to how to interpret any given piece of scripture. You take a piece of text and you read it, and then you say, all right, this is what it means for my life today. We can spend a lot of effort in doing that, in looking at the historical context and the original language and the other context around the text and everything, and come up with a very good, very solid interpretation based upon good hermeneutical methods. And there's a good theological word for you, hermeneutics.
Yeah. Love it.
But as much effort as you may go into to come up with that interpretation, I'm still an imperfect human being, still struggling and wrestling with wounds and pains and misconceptions and my own blindness to certain things, and the very basic fact that I'm not God. And so to comprehend the immense mind and nature of God and sum it up as a human being would sum it up, I'm never going to come close. So my biggest struggle, and this is one of the things that I deal with in my recovery process, actually, is letting go of my own need to be right and live in a tension of, this is what I understand to be the interpretation, this is what I think it is saying, but I have to be willing to say I might be wrong and allow that conversation to happen. That is a very scary thing for many people, to say, here's what I believe, but I could be wrong, because we're taught so much, especially in Christian circles, there's a right thing and this is what it is, and you need to have your solid foundation, be certain of what it is you're right and believe and everything. Otherwise you're going to fall away and get caught up in the storms of this world and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, yes, all right, my foundation is Jesus, my anchor is Jesus, but what I build on top of that foundation and anchor, I need to be willing to shift it, move it, redesign it, tear it down, remodel it, whatever. As long as the foundation is the same, I can adjust what's built on it until it becomes perfect. I know I'm talking a lot, but another idea that a visual image that I got in my head from a reading that I did a while ago, the Eastern Orthodox Church has this concept of, there's a great chasm between humanity and God. That humanity can just continue to be getting close to the edge of that gap that separates what it means to be human from what it means to be God. And you'll never cross the gap, but you will always be able to get closer and closer and closer to the edge, but you'll never be God. You can come very, very close to God, but you can never actually be him. And I think, again, back to the question, my biggest ongoing struggle is realizing that I cannot be God. I cannot say I have God's complete knowledge that he has, and to simply rely on him to guide and lead. I have convictions, I have beliefs, I have ideas, but I have to be willing to let God himself challenge them and say, okay, that's what you say you believe, Rob. But let me ask you this, Rob. What are you going to do about in this situation? What are you going to do in that situation that your nice and tidy theology might not have a good answer for? And that, yet again, that gets to that radical root. All right, what does it really mean to get down to the basics? Because sometimes I may not have that radical root 100% right, and I have to go back and say, okay, I need to rethink this, start over somewhere. Hopefully that answers the question, but I think that's kind of where my big struggle is in that process.
I just wanted to underline in there because you were talking about how much comes out of Matthew 5 through 7, and you may have even done it unconsciously, but of course your main illustration for your discussion there comes, of course, from Matthew 7.
Yep.
You build the house on the firm foundation, your house is built on the rock, and if so, then you have some, a chance to build in many ways, and even to rebuild if there's rock under there.
Yep.
So I was just noticing that that you were practicing what you preached.
Yeah. The imagery is so deep in my head when it comes to that passage is a very firm passage for me. And there's a parallel to it in Ephesians 4. Paul talks about being firmly anchored. And a picture that another pastor of mine years ago gave me is, all right, if you're an anchor on a boat, you got this long chain or rope. The anchor's down to the bottom of the ocean. You got this long chain or rope taking you up to the top of the ocean where the boat is. But that doesn't mean the boat's in one spot. There's slack in that line. The boat is going to be doing one of these things, moving around at the end of that line. You still have your anchor solid in the bedrock, in the fundamental truth of Jesus, but you're going to be shifting just a little bit as you try to figure out, well, then the next wave is coming. Well, I need to steer into this wave, or I need to rock back onto that wave. And that again, there's that picture of, yes, you have a firm foundation and a firm anchor in Jesus and the truth of who Jesus is, but life itself is not quite so nice and neat, and there's a lot of movement that can happen in that. So yeah, and again, it's that wrestle and struggle of making sure I'm staying anchored and be willing to let the boat move at the end of the chain as the waves go. I don't know if that.
Actually, and Hebrews uses that uses the some nautical terminology in terms of steering and which way are we going to. So it's interesting to watch the imagery of Scripture and and where it comes through. Now we're talking about and it's come up there. You had your own experience where the experiences of life kind of shook where you thought you were and where you thought you were going. And so we know this does lead into a book. And by the way, the book is the Caregivers Beatitudes. But let's start with asking, what was it? How did you come to be a caregiver? And while you're at it, you can talk a little bit about how that shifted the way your life was going, the way you thought your life was going.
That was 2013. No, yeah, somewhere around there. My wife was doing the good thing that we always tell women to do. Do your self-examinations, do your checks and everything like that, and she found a lump. And it was a bit of a disturbing situation. It was like, okay, what do we do about this? And she went to her doctor and called the doctor up and said, I found a lump. And the doctor said, come on in, we'll take a look at it. And long story short, on that particular part of things, after a biopsy, it came back as cancer. And let me give you some reference on this. I'm only 42, and my wife is 3 months younger than me. So she was at this point in time in our lives, She wasn't even 40 years old yet when she had her diagnosis. And that is unusual. To have a cancer diagnosis of breast cancer and not even be 40 years old yet. So already we were at a situation in our lives right there where everything that we had expected is got to go away. We could not expect the normal now. It was just one thing after another was just keeping on striking it out. Because I mean, first of all, the doctor said, okay, well, the positioning of the lump and the fact that it's painful to the touch, okay, typically cancerous tumors aren't that. So, well, we'll just do a mammogram. Okay, well, it doesn't come through right on the mammogram. All right, we'll do an MRI. That's an interesting picture on the MRI. That's not a cyst, but not exactly sure what it is. Could be just a fibrous mass. We'll do the biopsy, but it's probably nothing. And the biopsy come back cancer. Oh, okay. Well, let's see what's going on. And just one thing after another, we just kept on having. It felt like for the first few months that it was just the storms. Again, back to Matthew 7. The storms came. The storms in Ephesians 4 came. We were being battered by these storms of total uncertainty. It completely blindsided us, totally unexpected. I don't know if any of our listeners or watchers or anything like that have ever dealt with cancer treatments, and hopefully if they're interested in this book, they have some experience with it. But that was really a very traumatic is one word for it. Tumultuous, disturbing, scary, frightening, terrifying. First few months of that process. And neither of us really knew what we were doing with it. We knew other people who had cancer, but for whatever reason, especially with breast cancer, I guess, while women are going through the treatments, they don't talk about it. They don't talk about their surgeries. They don't share with anybody what their treatment schedules are. Just one day they are fine, and a few months later they've in the middle of chemo and radiation, and their hair's falling out, and it's like, wait a minute, what happened? Where did this all happen? And then a few months later, everything's done, and then it's all hush hush and quiet again. So who do you talk to whenever something like this happens? Because nobody seems to want to talk about it. And that kind of made it even worse in some respect, in that we didn't know who to turn to, where to go to talk to for some of these things. And so both my wife and I, we decided we were going to, individually and in some ways together, be very open and upfront about what we were going through. We weren't going to hide it. We weren't going to be shy about the processes we were going through, because we both like to process things out loud. My wife especially, she likes to process things outward. And I felt the need to share with somebody what was going on. And so, here, I'm a logical person. I work with computers for a living. I'm a software tester. My undergraduate degree is in mathematics, very logical, very cut and dry, black and white. 2 + 2 always equals 4. And here I was having to be a caregiver for my wife. A lot of things going on in our lives that she couldn't do anymore, either for herself or for taking care of our family. We have 2 daughters, and at the time, our eldest was, she's gonna be 15 in a month, 13, 12, and our youngest was 10 or 9, somewhere around there. Yeah, ages 9 and 12. And so they needed to be cared for. My wife didn't have the energy for it, and the strength for it. So I needed to take up some of the slack that she had. House still needed to be taken care of, cleaned. Dinner still needed to be made. Girls needed to be taken to their lessons. One daughter to flute lessons, other daughter to horseback riding lessons. So that stuff needed to go on. And we still had our normal life things to do. I still had a job. I still had to do my own stuff around the house of the repair work and things like that I had the skill set to do. So I found myself having to fill this role of having to take care of my wife and all the stuff around her, and not just take care of her physically, but to be a support, a counselor, a shoulder to cry on, things that, again, being the logical, very mathematical, scientific type person I am, dealing with emotional turmoil does not come easy for me. So I needed to figure out, all right, what in the world am I supposed to do? How do I do these kinds of things? And so I turned to my blog and I started writing it. Started writing out loud. All right, what does this mean? And in the process of doing so, again, we talked about earlier about how center to the Anabaptist theology and our interpretation of Scripture is the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount starts off with a set of characteristics that are very key to what it looks like to be a Jesus follower, being a peacemaker, mourning, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, being persecuted, all these different aspects of Christian walk that are sometimes uncomfortable to face. How does someone be meek? How does, and then in the process of doing so, what does it mean to be blessed when you're meek? And so I thought, well, these are some interesting things to look at. Can they apply to being a caregiver? So I started writing on that topic, and I built up a series of blog posts on each beatitude, and taking the principle in that beatitude and saying, how does this apply to a Christian being a caregiver for someone going through, in my case, cancer treatments? It was a very personal blogging experience because I had to be very vulnerable, very open about a lot of things. I was very uncomfortable writing it because again, we have this concept of Christians have it together. We're happy, we're joyful, everything's good, everything's hunky-dory all the time. Cancer happens, you can't just say everything's hunky-dory all the time anymore. And so to be open and vulnerable for some really deep and hard feelings, it was therapeutic. Someone used the word cathartic when reading my stuff. My wife was uncomfortable with it very much because here I was putting out in the open some very personal feelings that I had that were in essence caused by her. So it caused her to have to process through some of this stuff, and it really just kind of grew from that. It was an outpouring of my own struggles and trying to make sense of it, and then taking a very central piece of scripture to my life and using that to build the structure and the form around what I was going through, what my feelings were at the time. That's how the blog posts ended up being formed, and then they got turned into the book. Thanks to you guys, that it was an opportunity I wasn't looking for, but I'm glad I was able to do so, and maybe hopefully somebody can read the stuff and maybe it'll help them too. I don't know. So
okay, there's several things I want to go back to in what you just said. I wasn't going to interrupt because you're kind of on a roll.
okay.
With what you're doing, but to go back to the question, the answer that you gave to our that question that we read earlier, when you're talking about learning how not to have to be right.
Mm-hmm.
I think I relate you from the other end. I mean, as part of my own business, I've done some custom software design. And so I know that when you're designing software, one of the things you like is being in control.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be in control of everything, and when you do testing, you're wanting to say, okay, here we're going to have these inputs and we're going to get these outputs. And if we don't, everybody's going through the ceiling. I mean, it's kind of, you don't do things that way. And so you come into this situation and suddenly all of the things that were right are different. You'll understand that I've also had somebody in cancer treatment in the household, so I have some empathy. But also, Dave Black, who is another one of my authors, and is, as a matter of fact, the one who mentioned your blog posts and said, Henry, don't you think these would be a good book? And he and his wife chose to go through their cancer experience with cancer treatment publicly.
Oh, watching their stories, reading him, writing about his walk with his wife, and I'm sorry, but her name is blank. I'm blanking on her name right.
Becky Lynn.
Thank you, Becky. Listening to their story as it unfolded, the immense witness they have for a Christian going through a time of immense emotional and physical suffering and maintaining such a strong, solid faith, greatly inspiring. It really is. And then to read Becky's story of her own life that she wrote then afterwards, wrote then, and it was published. I guess it was published online. I don't know is there a hard copy form of it or not.
There is. It's called just My Life Story. We published it, and there's even a Spanish edition available, La Historia de mi vida, of that book.
That story was fantastic. And then to have Dave, just email me and say how much I was inspiring to him, that I think right there, that's really. You mentioned it before about how every Christian really is in some way going through recovery. The vulnerability that comes from recognizing that, and the ability for Christians to be vulnerable with each other in their times of pain and struggle. Another friend of mine said that he kind of wishes that every church was like an AA meeting. If you think about what happens at an AA meeting or to celebrate recovery like this, where you are completely open and vulnerable about all your emotions, not just always having to put that happy front up all the time, but always open, always vulnerable with all your emotions, even the ones that are the scary, dark, black ones that kind of churn in your heart a little bit. There's just something wonderful about sharing that vulnerability with people, and then to have it return back to you and have you be lifted up in it by other people who are walking that same path along with you. I think the Christian church would have an amazing turnaround if we set aside our facades of everything being all happy all the time, and everyone had that vulnerability of, this is the pain I'm going through. I think we would see a much different Christian church today than we do now if that vulnerability was more widespread.
Now, I have to tell you that the thing that attracted me about your manuscript, even more in a sense than what you had to say, which I think what you have to say is good, and the first steps that you give with each one of the Beatitudes are because it brings it down to a practical point. But probably I was already ready to publish simply because of the testimony that says, here I am, I'm out, and it's precisely putting that vulnerability publicly. I think, as I mentioned, being in treatment with cancer, our son went on to be with the Lord at age 17 after a 5-year battle with cancer and being treated. And we found since then that, because my wife and I went out to teach before that, and we went out to teach after that, and we found that, sharing the things that sharing what didn't go well. Our life is not perfect. Our life is not wonderful. We may be teaching you about prayer, but not everything goes our way. And when you share that material, that's, that people really, they respond because they feel the need. And there'll be people all through an audience, practically everybody there they have something that they've been afraid to share. And the simple fact that somebody who is teaching comes and does it, and somebody like Dave Black doing it on his blog, or you doing it on your blog says, okay, it is okay not to have the perfect life when you're a Christian. Being a Christian isn't about having the perfect life. Being a Christian isn't about all of my financial success. It isn't about having the perfect American family. It's not about living the American dream. And by giving people the impression that we're driving away some of the very people that Jesus was the most interested in talking to, speaking about following Jesus' approach. And I mean, that's the attraction to me is, essentially, the title and the introduction of your book is already, in my view, publishable, because it's something that we need out there to say, here we are living through this kind of experience, and we're ready to share, not just to give you some kind of a perfect result. Your experience and Dave's and mine have had different results along the way, but whatever the result, the Lord was with us, and we share that, and that's helpful.
Yeah.
So
I can say amen to that.
Well, I didn't expect you to be arguing with it, but I wanted to underline it, because that's the reason. That's the reason I took up publishing Becky Black's book, because, as we said, even in the description, she isn't the sort of person who normally gets a biography.
No.
She lived very, very humbly, but when you look at the story, she's the sort of person who should get a biography.
Right.
And
how many more stories are there like that out there? And again, I'm not saying that everyone should publish a book, but I mean, if we all share from that vulnerability and share from our pain, the stories of how we found support and grace and mercy and compassion in God and in Christianity in the midst of our pain, not in spite of our pain, but in the middle of it. I think we'll see some very different Christians in the world today. If we get to that Jesus in the middle of the storm, Jesus touching the lepers, Jesus walking with the beggars and going among the tombstones and casting out demons, and every story of not just the teachings of Jesus, but the pictures of him and who he interacted with. He wasn't going into the important places and dealing with important people. He was in the down and dirty, nitty gritty. A good buzzword term in Christian culture today is the idea of the marginalized. People are not at the center of society, but are on the edges of society, and how Jesus spent more time on those edges than he did with the people who are at the center. I think vulnerability is really going to make people more exposed to those edges than they are going to be trying to center themselves in the middle of the attention.
And I know it's my job to sell books so people can see this in this light, but one of the things I would like to see is more people who are not currently experiencing or not, starting on this pathway of some particular trouble, like cancer treatment, taking a look and being prepared to be part of the support for people who are, because one of the values of being the church is that not all of us are there at once, so to speak, that we're in different places in our experience. We have the ability to reach out to people, but sometimes it takes us experiencing the hardship for ourselves before we're ready to reach out and and just listen. To those who are, to those who are in need of somebody to listen, to those who are in need of somebody to say, here, let's have a little piece of advice. I don't know about your experience, but my experience was there'd come moments when, we didn't want one more decision to make.
Mm.
It's just really hard to say, okay, here's another thing we've got to decide. And you don't want to do it.
Right.
And it's very nice at that point to have somebody that you can say, look, can you help talk to me about this? Can you help me through understanding what's going on here?
It's a scary place. I mean, there was so many things going on that it just was one thing after another. It really was. And my wife got to the point of dreading her doctor's appointments, because every time we went to the doctor, it just, for some reason or another, seemed like, all right, we have a number of different scenarios that it could be. Some are good scenarios and some are bad scenarios. And she just always felt like every time she went to the doctor, the only scenario that she was ever given, oh, this is the bad scenario. There was always the bad news. It could be just a cyst, or it could be cancer. Oh, it's cancer. Well, we might not have spread to the lymph nodes, or it spread to the lymph nodes. Oh, it spread to the lymph nodes. And just one thing after another. And again, there are times when I wish that the women who we now know had breast cancer. It was interesting when we shared that we did, and my wife had it, how many people came out saying, yes, we went through it too. And like, well, why didn't you tell us? I think it would be so much better if people were just always open and honest about that kind of wrestle and that kind of struggle. Because it just brings that solidarity of, yes, we're walking that same path.
Yeah, but it goes back to what you said in the early part, in the early part of the interview. We like to be right. We like to be okay. We like our walk with God to be perfect. If I want to say, if I go out there and say, hi, I'm your Sunday school teacher for this morning, and I'm in real doubt right now about where I am with,
that won't go over
well. People don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
And people don't want to hear it, and we don't want to say it because I want to be the guy with the answers. To use the word that you brought in, I'm the guy with the good hermeneutic who's going to explain to you, how you're supposed to understand the scriptures. And if I say, look, this morning, as I was going over my finances, my business, my family, whatever, for whatever reason, I was really wondering if the Lord was actually with me or not.
Yeah.
That's not a real good start to that session from most people's point of view, but it might be the one that God actually wants us to do if that's where things are.
Yep.
So yeah, it's not an easy thing to do. So you went in, you blogged this. You went not just public locally, but you blogged this and shared it with the world.
Yeah, I did. Very much open in public about it, and I got a lot of people who really appreciated when I shared this stuff. And again, it was one of those things that, all right, I went out there and got vulnerable, and it really, all it takes is one person. It really does. All it takes is one person to step out of that comfort zone and say, I don't have it all together. I am not perfect. I am wrestling and struggling with things. It takes one person to do that. And then it's just like everybody then feels all of a sudden encouraged to say, yes, I'm there too. And it's a freeing, it's a releasing to know that it's okay to doubt. It's okay to have pain. because that's part of the human condition. Another story from Scripture that really helps me in that, I think it's in Mark 9. The guy who comes up to Jesus to have Jesus heal his daughter, and Jesus says, if you believe, then it will happen. And the guy says, Lord, I believe, help me in my unbelief. That strange paradox confession of both believing that Jesus can do something, but then still having these doubts that life's not perfect, all at the same time. To that man, to make that statement to Jesus, to be wide out there in the open, and I believe Jesus, but I'm still struggling with this. I think that that is a very encouraging story for people who are going through this kind of process of being, either they are the caregiver of someone who has a serious illness, or they themselves are dealing with that illness or that ailment, to know it's okay to tell God, I'm struggling with this, God. I wish I could be sure that you're hearing me. God, I'm praying to you, but I just need to know that you're there. To feel that freedom to be able to make that statement. That story is a fantastic story for that, for encouraging that.
It's interesting how much of this happens in Scripture and how afraid we are of being there. We like to identify ourselves with all the good and the solid people. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard the story of the crucifixion from somebody who was really certain that he wouldn't have run away. Sitting there thinking, you're facing the Roman soldiers who are going to crucify you, and you think you really truly believe that you're going to make it through this better than the original disciples.
Every single one of them, they had Jesus right in front of them. If anybody would have been able to stick around, it would have been the guys that actually walked with him every day. But no, every single one of them took off and ran. I mean, the only one that we know was actually at the cross at any point in time was John. But then we had this kind of he's just like, Jesus picks him out of the crowd. So you got to wonder, all right, what's John doing? Is he just kind of hiding behind the crowd and Jesus picks him out of the crowd? It's everybody else disappeared. And Peter, God love him, Peter, so sure that no, Jesus, I'm never going to betray you. I'm never going to deny you. Well, I'll always be there for you. 3 times in one night. No, I never knew the man. Oh, yeah. And if we did not personally experience Jesus physically in the flesh in front of us, and we think we're going to do better than Peter, no, I think we're fooling ourselves if we make that claim.
Okay, I got another audience question, so I'm going to read this in here for you.
Sure.
And it's getting specific now. It says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." What does a pure heart mean when we are struggling through cancer or job layoff or rejection or many other pits we may find ourselves in?
Oh boy, pure in heart.
I know that got you with a tough one there.
If I remember the way I dealt with this in the blog article, it was that same kind of thing. We like to think of the pure in heart as someone who has it all together. That when they say blessed are the pure in heart, that's someone who they don't struggle with sin, they don't struggle with doubt, they've got everything all together, they've got it figured out. Their heart is pure. They're not tempted by anything. They've got their act together. Blessed are the pure in heart, because they will see God. And I had to take that apart, and I had to think, okay, what exactly does that mean? And I think what I came down with, that a pure heart doesn't necessarily mean that you're not struggling, that you're not wrestling with temptations, but that your heart is free and your motives are pure. That the reasons why you're doing things are where your purity comes from. I have doubts. I have points that I wrestle with. I have items that I struggle with, that I'm tempted with in my life. But I'm aiming for doing what seems to be right. And so if the example that I had from me doing my wife's cancer treatments, pure in heart. What does it mean for me to be pure in heart? It means that I am not filled up with things that are going to take away from my ability to be able to help my wife through stuff. That it's really hard to pin down, but it's that I'm going to center my soul, cleanse it, and find that rooted place, like a fire that refines gold. Again, using an imagery from Scripture. It's burning off all the excess, burning off all the stuff that doesn't matter, and getting down to the core, to the clean center. I mean, I'm not. Forgive me, I'm pulling up my web browser, but I'm trying to remember what exactly I wrote on that.
What about just plain honesty?
Yeah,
that's one of the terms that comes to my mind with this, because that's what's hard for us to do. I think is to be honest with ourselves and say, here's what it means, here's what it is.
Yeah, pure in heart, honesty. What did I write down? Yeah, it's the same thing. If you get all these rules in order, you'll be able to get close to God and promise that they will see God. But there's a problem in the way you look at it. I'm reading from my own book now because I'm trying to remember what I wrote, because I know that I played around with this. This is, yeah, it's you can't spend your time trying to avoid drinking, avoid anger, avoid lust when you're dealing with it. You don't have the time and the energy to deal with those things. So you have to look at what the purity of is. And it's that finding that center place. It is focusing on the good. There's so many things that could go wrong in life, and things will go wrong. There will be bad things that happen. For me to be a caregiver for my wife and maintain a heart purity means that I need to come to her with a positivity, that rather than focusing on all the bad, to focus on the good. That let her pour into me her feelings of bad, and me pouring back into her the good that can still happen. With any of these things, the question asks about job layoffs, rejections, all these other things. Again, it's allowing those bad things to exit. All right, something bad's coming at me. All right, take it, acknowledge it, let it out, let it exit, and keep this pure center, that pure core, so that you can focus on that part of things. For being a caregiver, that means that allows me to be able to come to my wife, who is in a dark place, and bring a light into the dark place for her. For somebody who's dealing with job loss, it allows you to be able to set aside. You're acknowledging the bad thing that happened. You set it aside so that you can focus again on the good things that are going on, to be able to look for the good and to be able to seek out the people that you can need. And then when you're addressing people who are in these situations, it's the same thing. There's another author that I heard on the radio one time that talks about how when you're dealing with someone who's going through a hard time, they're at the center of things, and they're going to be projecting outward the bad things that are happening to them. If you are dealing with them and working with them, you receive the bad things that are coming outward, and then you put back into them the good things that you see. You're taking that purity, that light, and putting it back into them. You don't put bad stuff into them. You don't dwell on the bad stuff in them. You allow the good into them, and you receive the bad. All bad stuff goes outward. All good stuff goes inward. That allows that person to be strong and solid and centered, encouraged, lifted up, and you then take on the burden of the bad and then push that outward to other people, that let those other people that are helping you, supporting you, they'll receive the bad that comes off you, and they'll pour in good to you then as well. It's that the directionality of the flow. I think that's where I'm trying to go with this Puritan heart. That you keep the purity, you keep the good here, pour the bad stuff outward, and let the good flow inward. I think I used imagery in one of the first chapters of the book, of the idea of my wife's at the top of the pyramid of people supporting her. I'm holding her up. There are people holding me up. There are people holding those people up, and so on like that. And I think this is the common theme that I put throughout all the chapters I wrote on this. Community is really important when it comes to this. This heart purity is only possible in community. You can't do it by yourself. So when it says, "For they will see God," what did Jesus say? Where two or more of you are gathered, I'm there. What better way to see God than when you see God principles acted out in his community of people gathered around someone who is hurting and in pain? Blessed are the pure in heart who keep that purity. They'll see God because the community of people will gather around and be able to be there to support.
Okay, so what you're doing there, in essence, is putting the body of Christ into action.
Yes.
And the body, the family, we use different metaphors. I'm popping up here on screen share the cover of the book because we're running out of time. It's titled The Caregivers Beatitudes. It's in our topical line drive series. It's right about 40 pages, a little less than that. So this is not a long read. One of the things I found is that when we're dealing with a hard time, about the last thing we want to do is get a 300 or 400 page book to read about it. So this one's easy to read, gives the experience, and it's just $4.99 in print and 99 cents on Kindle.
Yep.
Our ebook formats are just 99 cents. So if you can afford it and you can read it in a short period of time. So I want to bring that out, and I've been talking with Robert Martin, who's the author of the Caregivers Beatitudes. And as we have just a couple more minutes, I do need to tell people what's going on next Tuesday night, which is very different from tonight. We are getting a quite controversial topic. Elgin Hushbeck, who wrote the book What is Wrong with Social Justice, is going to be discussing it with Steve Kendall, who thinks that there's a very lot right with social justice, and I will be moderating. So we will have, I think, an interesting and probably forceful discussion next week at the same time. Every Tuesday night, 7 p.m. Central, that's 8 p.m. Eastern, we have one of these hangouts with one or more of our Energion authors. So that's what's coming up next week. And given that you have about a minute and a half, would you have anything you'd like to say as kind of a closing comment?
I think there was a question I had on a theology exam in seminary, where we were asked to pick one of the pieces of wisdom literature from the Bible, Job, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, and to, in a single paragraph, sum it up. Yeah, that was a big task. But I chose Job, and I think this plays right along with this idea of being a caregiver. The central theme that I get out of the book of Job that goes right along with this is the question that the question the book of Job is answering is not why do bad things happen to good people. It is what do good people do when bad things happen. And whether it's cancer, whether it's Alzheimer's, whether it's untimely death, whether it's any number of bad things that can happen out there, I think the best thing to do as a follower of Christ is to not try to figure out why the bad thing is happening, but what is our response to it? What should we be doing about it? And hopefully in wrestling with that response, we're going to be looking at how Jesus leads us in that direction. So in my wrestling with being a cancer caregiver, that's really what I was looking at. What does it mean? What does a righteous person do when a loved one has cancer? Hopefully the answers that I put out there are helpful to someone, and I would love to have more conversations with people about it. I would love to be able to share my story with more people. So look me up online. I'm out there. I'm not shy, so come find me and I'll be willing to talk.
Yeah, they can use the hashtag Menno Nerds, and they'll probably catch you somewhere in there.
Oh, right? Yeah, you'll find me there somewhere. Yep.
Okay, well, thank you so much for talking to us, and thank you for the testimony as presented in your book, as well as tonight. And thank each person who is viewing, or as we usually have, many, many more view later than actually view during the time. So we thank them too. Good night, everybody. Hopefully I'll see you folks next week.
All right. Thank you.